child's Christmas in Yorkshire. The Dickens it is.
"Oh, look," said Mam, kicking me Dad on the leg, but not very hard.
"Where is it now?" he said, still reading the paper.
"A Christmas Carol's on tomorrow night, the real one with Alistair Sim."
"Well, block my hairy nose with a radish," said Dad, winking at me. "Who'd have thought they'd have put that on at this time of year?"
"No need to be sarcastic, we're watching it all right," she said in her "and that's final" voice,
which worked just as well on Dad as it did on me and our Jimmy.
"We'd just been doing Charles Dickens at school."
"Charles Dickens wrote that film," I said. "That's right, lad, he did," said me Dad. "And you know what else?"
"What?"
"Ebenezer Scrooge came from Malton."
"Rubbish," said Mam. "Did he really, Dad? That stingy old Scrooge, did he come from Malton?"
"Aye, lad, he was your mother's grandad."
Me Dad was asking for a clout, and I waited for Mam to say something, but she still had her head stuck in the Radio Times. She tutted. "Your father's more full of rubbish than Peasyhill Tip." Our Jimmy laughed. Peasyhill Tip was one of our best places to lark, but we weren't supposed to go up there. "Scrooge never came from Malton at all, and neither did Charles Dickens." Me Dad suddenly folded his paper with a lot of noise. He does this. Some people, when they're getting into an argument, say things like, "Now hold on a minute," or "Hey, now look here." But me Dad just folds his newspaper with a lot of noise. And he folds it, and folds it, and folds it, until it's just a small square, well past what it's supposed to fold up like. You could get it in your pocket. "And before you start," she said to him, "I'll have you know I once did a school project on A Christmas Carol." Then our Jimmy folded his comic up, trying to be like Dad, but he didn't make out like as much noise, and he tore the back page. We waited for Dad to say something, 'cause we knew he would. He leaned right forward, almost out of his chair.
"Ebenezer Scrooge was a bookkeeper who worked in Malton at Backett Picture House," he said. "And that's right."
He should have put his tongue out like we do at school, then she would have known he was right. "Good grief, here we go," said Mam, closing the Radio Times quietly and straightening out her pinny. She looked at me and Jimmy. "I sometimes wonder if your father ever went to school." I could see where this was going. Me Mam had gone up to grammar school when she was a girl, which was quite posh, and me Gran still talks about her in the uniform. But me Dad had gone to some little school that wasn't posh, in Pickering, and I don't think he went there very often. "A lot of folks think that Scrooge came from Malton," she said.
"And a lot of folks is right then," said Dad.
"But," she said, "it was just Scrooge's office that came from Malton. That's all, his office." I was trying to think what Scrooge's office looked like, 'cause it had been ages since I'd seen the film, but I couldn't think.
"How the heck can an office come from anywhere?" said Dad. "Eh?"
"What I mean is, the office Dickens described in his novel was based on a real office that Dickens once went to in Malton." Mam was talking in her posh voice now, but I don't know where the film went and this novel thing came in. "He had a friend worked there, and yes, I'll grant you, it was right behind the cinema in Chancery Lane, still is in fact."
"Well, it would be his friend that was Scrooge then," said Dad.
"Is he dead, Mam?" said Jimmy, who was scared stiff of Scrooge, 'cause I'd seen him hide behind the settee last time the film was on. "Yes, he is," said Mam. "Well, what I mean is, he was never really alive, 'cause it was all made up. It's just a story, love."
"Just a story, me bald Aunt Fanny," said Dad. I could see he was getting it up now.
"He believes in Father Christmas, does me Dad, so I suppose that thinking Scrooge is real comes easy to him." "You won't have it, will you?" said Mam. "So, we'll find out then, shall we? We'll go to the authority." Then she went over to the bureau and got a writing pad out. "Pen," she said, and Dad got the biro from behind his ear and chucked it to her. "Right, lads," she said, after she'd spent 2 minutes writing something. "You just take this round to Mr. Fenwick. You know where he lives, don't you?" Oh, we knew all right. He lives up Cemetery Lane, the only house up there, right next to all the graves, the scariest house in the village. Nobody ever went there, not even Maxon's dog, and it goes everywhere. "If anyone knows what's what about Charles Dickens, it's Mr. Fenwick," said Mam, folding the note and sticking it out to me. "He was the best teacher that grammar school ever had. Shame to see him retire, but he's still worth 3 of them that's wasting chalk up there now. Go on, get your coats on and take that torch from cupboard under stairs." She was serious. She wouldn't usually let us out at this time of night on our own. Even the shop was shut. And she was sending us up Cemetery Lane. In dark. I wondered if we'd be getting paid for it. Now then, give that note to Mr. Fenwick. Don't forget your please and thank yous, and he'll tell you all about Charles Dickens. Then you come straight back here and we'll try and drum it into that ignorant father of yours. She opened the front door, made sure Jimmy's scarf was tight, and shoved us outside. And save them torch batteries, she said as she shut the door. Oof, it was freezing cold, and so dark that the streetlights seemed to be struggling just to stay on. Hey, this is all right, there, said Jimmy. Off out by ourselves, at night.
Aye, I said, but you wait till you get to Cemetery Lane. You won't be so keen then. And he wasn't. When we walked past Hunter's Hall and got to the bottom of the lane, it seemed to get even darker. It seemed just the right time for an owl to hoot, or a fox to scream somewhere over a field. I shone the torch up the lane, but the light didn't go very far. Anyway, we set off, real careful. I don't know how it happened, but I suddenly noticed I was holding our Jimmy's hand. Are you scared, there? He said. Well, what are you supposed to say to that? To a younger brother, I mean. So I said nought. Then I said, no, not much. Funny thing was, he didn't mind holding hands, and neither did I, so we kept doing it. Mr. Fenwick's was the only house on Cemetery Lane, up past some sheds and a fallen-down greenhouse. They were all full of black shadows and strange, quiet noises that I didn't want our Jimmy to know about. I didn't want to know about 'em either. I kept the torch pointed down the lane in front of us and walked as quick as I could. I didn't even stop to pick up what looked like a penny down among some gravel. Finally we got to the front door, and the house was all dark. I reached up and got hold of his knocker. It was cold, and shaped like a lion, and when I knocked it was real loud. Is it going to turn into a face like that ghost in the film? Said Jimmy. No, it bloody isn't, I said, and knocked again, even louder, just to show I wasn't scared. I let go of his hand. From somewhere inside there was a little yapping noise that came closer and closer. Then we heard somebody messing about behind the door, scratching and banging and undoing bolts and so on. Then it opened with a big squeak, and we stepped back a bit, and we were suddenly holding hands again, though it wasn't my idea. And Mr. Fenwick was there, holding a candle and looking down at us. He was tall and old, real old. The yapping thing was a Jack Russell who stuck its nose up Jimmy's trouser leg and wouldn't take it out. Hello, Mr. Fenwick, I said. Why, hello, it's Derek, isn't it, and your brother James? Hello, boys, so nice to see you. Are you carol singing? No, I said, we came with a message from me mum, and I shoved the note at him. Ah, yes, he said, ah, yes. Come in, and let's see what's to do. We went in, along his front passage, Mr. Fenwick in front, then me, then Jimmy, then the Jack Russell, right through into his sitting room. It was a bit dark, only 3 candles and an oil lamp going, and there was no Christmas decorations up or anything. Just thousands and thousands of books. Sit down, he said. And I thought, well, there's no need to keep saying everything twice just 'cause there's 2 of us. We can both hear at the same time. Anyway, we moved some books and sat on settee while he read the note. Jimmy leaned over to me and whispered, He's had a lot of birthdays, hasn't he, Der? Shut up, I said. Ah, your mother's asking about Dickens' Christmas Carol, I see, he said. And how is your mother? Is she well? Yes, thank you, I said. Yes, thank you, said Jimmy. Would you boys like a mint? And he passed me this old box with a lid on, the kind that usually has cigarettes in it when you see 'em on a film. Thanks, I said, and took one, and then passed it along to Jimmy. Thank you, he said. I popped it in my mouth, and right away I knew it was an extra strong old English mint. Bugger. This was going to hurt. And I should have stopped our Jimmy get one, 'cause he'll be screaming in a minute, but too late. He had it in his mouth and was sucking. Now then, boys, Charles Dickens. Your mother was a good scholar during her years at our school, and she helped me do considerable research into that most celebrated of our 19th century novelists. I wasn't sure what he was on about,
but I was doing better than our Jimmy, who'd seemed to be going cross-eyed and chewing on his sleeve. This was his first ever Old English mint, probably his last and all. Mr. Fenwick pulled a pipe down from a rack on the mantelpiece and stuck it in his mouth. Well now, Charles Dickens was born on Friday, February 7th, 1812, at Landport, a suburb of Portsmouth. That's way down south, you know. His father, John, was a clerk in the Navy pay office attached to the dockyard, and his mother was Elizabeth Dickens. It all seemed a bloody long way from Scrooge and Tiny Tim, and I was busting to get back outside and get shot of this mint. Jimmy was smiling again, though his eyes were watering, and he was still wiping his mouth on his sleeve. He was watching the terrier, who seemed to be licking its chops a lot, and coughing. Old Fenwick rattled on. The Dickens family moved to London when Charles was 2. John had a poor head for finances, and in 1824 he found himself imprisoned for debt. Young Charles was put to work at Warren's blacking factory and had his first taste of child labour. I was just thinking that child labour would taste a lot better than this mint. I was beginning to wish I'd brought one of my dad's hankies. And when's Scrooge going to show up then, eh? When the family finances were put at least partly to rights and his father was released, the 12-year-old Dickens, already scarred psychologically by the experience, was further wounded by his mother's insistence that he continue to work at the factory. His father, however, rescued him from that dreadful fate, and between 1824 and 1827 Dickens was a day pupil at a school in London. It must be nearly midnight, I was thinking. When's he going to shore up? Our Jimmy was missing. I think he'd followed the dog through into the kitchen. I bet they both wanted some water, and old Fenwick hadn't noticed him leave. He rattled on. At 15 he found an employment as an office boy at an attorney's, while he studied shorthand at night. His brief stint at the blacking factory haunted him all of his life, but the dark secret became a source both of creative energy and of the preoccupation with the themes of alienation and betrayal, which would emerge most notably in David Copperfield and in Great Expectations. "Excuse me, Mr. Fenwick," I said. "Yes, Derek?" "He did write Christmas Carol, didn't he?" "Indeed he did. A Christmas Carol was the first of Dickens' enormously successful Christmas books, each intended as, and I quote him here, a whimsical sort of masque intended to awaken loving and forbearing thoughts." "Aye, righto then, and did Scrooge come from Malton?" "Good heavens, my boy, no, he didn't. The Pickwick Papers, published on New Year's Eve in 1836, had contained as a good-humoured Christmas chapter the story of the goblins who stole a sexton. The tale's protagonist, the solitary old bachelor curmudgeon, the gravedigger Gabriel Grubb, is the prototype of Ebenezer Scrooge, a prototype being the first model on which a later version is based, of course." "And did he work behind the picture house?" "Ah, so that's the connection you seek. Well, Dickens had several friends in the Malton area and visited them frequently. He often stayed at the Talbot Hotel, and a certain acquaintance worked as an accountant in chambers behind the Palace Cinema. The building still stands, though it's now disused. Apparently Dickens drew on that office there for his portrayal of the tank in which Scrooge and his clerk Bob Cratchit worked. The remainder of the setting, we presume, came from the author's early childhood spent in Bayham Street, Camden Town, which included the unseasonably cold Christmases of 1812 to 1820. Actually, Charles Dickens had no more nor fewer white Christmases than you or I can expect today in Yorkshire. The clock struck 9, and our Jimmy came back and climbed onto settee, still wiping his mouth. Mr. Fenwick," he said, "your dog's been sick." But the old man didn't hear him. "Shut up," I said. "Say nowt." It was late, and I know me mum sent us here, but we'd have to get back soon or there'd be war on. Fenwick had some good batteries in tonight, though. He just kept going. "Dickens has been accused of romanticising the foibles of the Industrial Revolution." "You what?" I said. "Well, most of the working-class people were very poor in those days," he said. "Mam says we're poor," said Jimmy. "No, she doesn't," I said, giving him a kick. "She says we're not very well off, and that's different." "Yes," said Mr. Fenwick. "Indeed it is. Wealth is a broad category." "See, me dad said Scrooge comes from Malton,
That's what Mam needs to know. Yes, quite, said Fenwick, looking at Mam's note again. But I'm afraid he's incorrect. Your father didn't attend school in Malton, did he? No, I said. He's from Pickering. Ah, said Fenwick, nodding slowly, as if that accounted for a lot. Mam always says it does. To summarise, then, please remind your mother and inform your father that neither Dickens nor his fictitious character Ebenezer Scrooge came from Malton. The office depicted in A Christmas Carol, however, can be said to have been conceived in this town, as you suggest. Another point of local interest is that Jacob Marley's name was derived from our local term for soil, marl. It's also the term that some of our hill farmers use for sleet, so it has cold, wintry connotations very apropos to the story. Right you are, then. Thank you, I said. We'll be away now. We got off the settee and went back down the passage to the front door, Fenwick leading the way with the lamp. It only just dawned on me. There was no electric in this house. I bet he's never even seen Scrooge on the telly. He opened the door to let us out. So, I said, Scrooge wasn't from Malton, but his office was. Yes, you could say that, he said. Well, good night, boys, and Merry Christmas to you and your family. Good night, I said. Merry Christmas. Hey, do you want to carol? Said Jimmy, but he'd shut the door. We ran back down Cemetery Lane and didn't save the torch batteries. When we got home, Dad was reading the Radio Times and Mam was polishing some brass candlesticks. So, she said, how's Mr. Fenwick? He's blooming old, said Jimmy. Yes, love, and what did he have to say? Scrooge ain't from Malton, he's from Pickwick Papers, I said. And that Jacob Marley's from a farm round here where it sleets a lot, said Jimmy. And the office, said Dad. Scrooge's office, where's that from? Malton, me and Jimmy said, both together. See, just like I told your mother, said Dad. Mam dropped a candlestick, looked at the ceiling and said something about God giving her strength. I thought about the film again. Hey, Mam, I said, where does the ghost of Christmas Yet to come from? Oh, she says, you mean the one that dresses funny, with mean-looking hands, and he never says anything nice? Aye, that's him, that one. Well, I bet he's from Pickering, she said.